Ladies and gentlemen, they say when the lights go down and the cameras stop rolling, some truths stay hidden. Tonight, we're going to dig into some of that truth. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get into some of the straight game.
Blackjack. Life is like some cards. It's not what you dealt, but how you play it. Play each situation correctly. I remember they used to laugh at a brother.
Welcome back, guys. Welcome back. It's your boy Delray Richardson, platinum artist, platinum songwriter, Straight Game TV. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate your time. Do me a favor, click on the thumbs up button. Also, subscribe to the channel if you have not already. And like I always say, if you want to be one of the first people notified when I drop some of the straight game, please do me a favor and click on what appears to be that little bell notification right below this video. Ladies and gentlemen, Sean P. Diddy Combs' mother has spoken out, and she didn't pull any punches in regards to what she had to say about the accusations made about her in the Sean Combs The Reckoning documentary, 4-part documentary, if you will. And so, with that being said, we're gonna get right into it. You know what I mean? Yeah, she's not having it. We know Diddy's mom, you know, her past, a little bit about her past, at least about Diddy's father being murdered and what have you. Like I said, once again, his childhood, some of his childhood was attempted to be explained in the documentary. And basically saying that Janice Combs was abusive to her son. That was one of the accusations that were made in the documentary. Another accusation was that Diddy basically abused his mom. Right? So, like I said, Janice Combs spoke out today. She said the documentary basically misrepresents her and her son's upbringing, his family, even alleged that things that happened decades ago that a lot of people or the person who alleged them in the documentary wasn't even present for, if you want to be perfectly honest. Like I said, we're going to break it down. Basically, what Ms. Combs said, why it matters, and what this means for Diddy, Bad Boy Records, and his history. We're not going to give you no spin, ladies and gentlemen. We're just going to give you the facts, right? So now, what Janice Combs actually said, and why it's really important that we listen to what she said. Like I said, there were a lot of what she covered, the sensationalism aspect of what they were talking about. But that's one thing. It was a lot of things that were being said that could not be corroborated. The young man who said it was at a very young age when he was saying some of the things that he was saying. Left to be insinuated that Janice Combs was doing some nefarious or into some kind of nefarious behavior, if you will. But he never really spoke of that. You know what I mean? Like I said, in dealing with Sean P. Diddy Combs' father, him being murdered, him being a gangster hustler, does not always mean that the woman or the girlfriend or the wife is also involved in an activity, right? And so this is the important part. So like I said, today, ladies and gentlemen, Janice Combs, and she's 85 years old, if you will, right? Released a statement demanding a correction. So she's basically demanding a correction from the people, I guess, at Netflix and the producers, the director of the documentary. She wanted a correction of what she described as basically lies. She didn't pull no punches. She said basically they lying. You know what I mean? In the docuseries, and she addressed several key allegations, right? The main one for me was the fact that she claimed that she wanted retracted the claim that her son slapped her, right? After the 1991 City College basketball tragedy. She says that never happened. and calls it patently false. Now, I believe it was Kurt Burrows who said that. Kurt Burrows has come under fire, not only from Janice Combs, but Gene Deal over on Art of Dialogue dropped an explosive video today if you want to go check that out. But I want to say this. The video from yesterday over on the Art of Dialogue is at like almost 450,000 views in 24 hours, ladies and gentlemen. Gene Deal basically sets a lot of stuff straight. Why he wasn't in the documentary, you got to go check that out. But like I said, Diddy's mom coming out and speaking out basically and basically saying that it was lies is another testament to what went on in this documentary and how, people can say anything, you know what I mean? But if it's not really backed by any facts or any kind of proof, and it goes to show, like I said, with the Cassie video and Diddy being seen in that violent situation with her, any and everybody can allude to it. But the fact that somebody would allude to it in regards to his mom without any kind of proof is crazy. Like I said, she wants them basically to correct the claim that her son slapped her after the 1991 City College basketball tragedy. She says that never happened and calls it patently false, right? That also what she addressed was that family and upbringing stories portrayed in the film are misleading. And like I said, that's very important because, like, how would, I listened to that. I'm like, and it sounds, if you looking at the documentary and you're trying to be entertained, versus factually informed is two different things, right? I've seen people come out on various channels talking about, Diddy made Biggie pay for his own funeral and so on and so. We didn't see any evidence of that. And that's the problem that I had. There was no evidence of Diddy having to pay, Biggie's family, Miss Wallace, Faith Evans, or any of his children or, like I say, family members coming out stating that that was true. And so when somebody made, and like I said, that wasn't the first time that I heard Kurt Burrows make that accusation. As a matter of fact, what shows me that they went and looked at the Art of Dialogue videos because that was the place that he made it that first time I heard the accusation that Diddy had allegedly laid hands on his mom, right? And so she's basically saying that it's patently false. It's basically a lie, like I said, for lack of a better term, right? And then what else she addressed was the fact that the family and the upbringing stories portrayed in the film are misleading, she says, right? Those narratives were crafted, she says, to sensationalize and harm their reputation. Once again, I don't know if Diddy mom beat Diddy, or should I say how hard she beat Diddy, or whatever have you, right? But the allegation that was made in the documentary was that, she was, if you wanted to, put it in, like I said, for lack of a better term, that she was abusive to Diddy. And this is how they alluded to it. This is why he ended up the way that he ended up. You know what I mean? Trying to make inference or reference to, her mistreating her son. And this is why he turned out the way he turned out is what I got from it. And like I said, Diddy's mom basically is saying, you know what? Those narratives that they came up with in this documentary were crafted and sensationalized to harm their reputation at this particular time. She also addressed the accusations that the film used a tragic event, the 1991 game crowd, and the people getting crushed and 9 people being killed at that time to push what she calls false narratives about Sean P. Diddy Combs. Now, like I said, she's not the only one saying what she just said. And Gene Deal, like I said, Gene Deal basically said he was there. You got to go check out the Art of Dialogue interview, the one he dropped yesterday and the one he dropped today, because Gene Deal said something similar to that. he spoke on another young lady who actually fault it really was. You got to go check out the Art of Dialogue video. Who fault it really was. I think her name was Jane. I can't Jane something, but if you go watch the video, you'll definitely be able to get the information. Gene Deal said it was the young lady's fault. Gene Deal said she was the one that actually closed the doors and locked the doors so that the people could not get through those doors. And Gene Deal said that young lady was the one that was responsible for the 9 deaths. But for some reason, way, shape, or form, they didn't mention her name in the documentary, and also that her name was mentioned at the time of that incident, if you will. So, like I said, Diddy's mom is out here basically addressing the fact that, like, you know, she basically saying, hey, you know what? They using that 1991, situation about that incident where the people lost their lives to basically push false narratives about Diddy. Now, once again, we know about that situation, but like I said, Gene Deal talks heavily about it, like I said, because he was there. And the reason why they didn't have him in the documentary, he talks about that also, right? Janice Combs also said that the documentary is outrageous and offensive and insistent these elements be corrected. Like she signed off demanding respect for her son's legacy and her family's truth. And I think that's very important, ladies and gentlemen. Like I said, Kurt Burrows spoke out. You know, you had Mark Carey speaking out. We had William Lassane not dealing with anything involving Diddy's family, but talking about the Tupac murder situation. And like I said, I thought that was one of the more accurate parts of the documentary, if you will. Like I said, that was, you know, a public display of disenchantment, beef, whatever you want to call it at that particular time. But the stuff related to her personal life, Miss Combs basically said that she not having it, and you know, like I said, once again, it's totally false, and it's outrageous and offensive, and they using a lot of these things to push a false narrative, if you will. You know, why does this really truly honestly matter? Most people wouldn't think. Like I said, you know, her statements won't get pushed out there like all of the other outrageous stuff, because like I said, the outrageous stuff is used to garner your attention so that you can go watch the documentary. Like I said, it's about views, clicks, advertising, you know, and like I said, that's fair for what it is too. But like I said, when somebody is lying or does not corroborate anything that they're saying and just basically using someone's statements as facts, that's always a problem, especially when the person is still living and can basically address what they're saying is outright lies, is what Janice Combs is basically saying, right? You know, and ladies and gentlemen, this is not just celebrity drama. When the mother of a public figure speaks out like this, right, what it does more than anything is it challenges the narrative that people are trying to push, right? We've seen what happened. We know why Diddy's in jail. All of those things are true. You know what I mean? For what we understand and what was testified to in that courtroom, right? But when his mom comes out and speaks, somebody who rarely speaks out, it challenges the narrative, right? And it also forces a second look at testimony, interviews, and archival sources, right? The people who are actually coming out and speaking about this. This is what it does. And like I said, there's always two sides to every story. And then in the middle somewhere, there's, you know, some truth to that, if you will, right? And it also, it centers the family's truth over sensationalism. You see what I'm saying? And I understand, like, you know, Diddy's famous, all of those things, kids, family, you know, all of the hoopla, the drama. But, you know, this is basically just about what Janice Combs is coming out saying, right? And for a documentary produced by someone like 50 Cent, with heavy public influence, you know, this can reshape how viewers interpret everything, because they were throwing 50's name out there. And I thought it was important. Like I said, once again, Gene Deal, you know, has stated, you know, his displeasure at times with Diddy and so on and so forth, and spoken his truth according to what he lived, saw, and witnessed with his own eyes. So some of what he said, basically, he was saying that they basically used. He said that he was told by the director that they just used 50 Cent as a way to promote and push, quote, and push the documentary. Like she said that he's over there telling the Art of Dialogue this. That's why I think that that's very important that we hear what's really going on. Like I said, once again, Gene Deal was speaking, from firsthand information in a conversation he said that he had with the director of Sean Combs, The Reckoning, right? So, like I said, it's very important. But when like I said, when somebody mom comes out who doesn't really say anything, she's not really looking for attention or something like that. I think that that's very important and warrants the right amount of attention, if you will, right? But it also raises ethical questions of filmmaking. Like when somebody makes a documentary, Big Boy had Marlon Wayans on there and asked him about the Sean Combs, The Reckoning. And Marlon Wayans, he's directed films, he's acted. He's basically saying, well, who's saying it, right? He said, I could grab a bunch of cameras, get people and put them in front of the cameras and get them to push a certain narrative or a certain belief that I have about certain individuals involved with certain or allegedly involved with certain incidents. And he was speaking particularly about the Tupac situation because Marlon Wayans, I believe he said in the past that he was in Vegas and talked to Pac shortly before he was killed. And I think he was somewhere in the vicinity of the Peterson Automotive Museum. So Big Boy had asked him the question as to if he believed what was being said about who killed Tupac in the documentary. And basically Marlon was going into the fact that you can put up cameras, get anybody say anything about, who was involved and come up with some kind of narrative. And that's true. It's true. Like I said, once again. So when like I said, you got to ask yourself a question. When is exposure exploitation, right? Somebody getting exposure, being in a documentary, having their face plastered all over, Netflix and the television. You got to ask yourself, when is exposure exploitation, right? When are you being exploited, right? When does storytelling cross into hurting real people and real families? Despite what a person may feel about somebody, right? Diddy has kids, and like I said, Diddy's mom, she's a grandmother. She's 85 years old. And it's like people are going on these documentaries, saying things. And then, from what it's being said, they're not being compensated for it, right? That's what's being said, that they're not being compensated. So my question is it for exposure? Are people being paid? Or they're being exploited, if you will. You got to ask yourself, right? Is it for money? They want to gain exposure, or they being exploited? You know what I mean? So I really don't know. It's like you want to see yourself on TV on Netflix, and that's why you went to do this documentary. But a lot of those people who spoke also are suing Diddy civilly based on alleged wrongdoing and things that he's done to them in the past. Like I said, that's up for another day in dealing with the court, if you will, right? So what does this really actually mean for Diddy and Bab and his legacy? Like I said, Diddy's whole history has been complicated. Fame, money, tragedy, lawsuits, legacy, Biggie's death, the alleged involvement in Tupac's death, all of those things, right? But I'll say this, if Diddy's mom is right about this, right? Some of the truths told in The Reckoning may not just be disputed facts. They may be harmful fabrications, if you will. You know what I mean? It's one thing, like I said, to know about something, to have seen something and been through something, right? And like I said, once again, what Gene Deal was talking about, some other young lady who was the person who was actually responsible for those 9 people's deaths. But every time that you hear about it, you hear about Diddy and it was something that he did. And like I said, when I watched the documentary, I was like, well, it wasn't nothing that he could do. You know, if they bum rushing the spot because it's crowded and they not letting nobody else in, and they choose to bum rush the spot, and you know, we got to get up in here because the tickets are sold out. I mean, I don't think that there's really nothing nobody can do about that. But more importantly, what Gene Deal alluded to was the fact that it was a young lady, like I said, who locked those doors. Like I said, you got to go check out the Art of Dialogue interview. It was a young lady, Gene Deal said, that locked the doors, and that was the reason that those people were killed. And Gene Deal basically said if that door was not locked, then none of them people would have died. Like I said, you got to go check out the Art of Dialogue interview. Over 400,000 views in less than 24 hours, if you will. So like I said, but more importantly, the harmful fabrications, like, you know, and then the history becomes not just about success or, you know, the music and the things that Diddy's done, but about survival, right? The memory and respect for things behind the music. And like I said, this has been a tumultuous, if you could have asked me back in the day, like, you know, what I thought that Diddy would have been going through what he's going through, I would have told you no. But like I said, a lot of people who were close to him said Diddy was a foul dude. You know what I mean? And really didn't do what he was supposed to do. I'll let them speak on that. You know what I mean? When people say that, I think that's important that the people who actually went through that with him, like I said, you know, they can accurately speak on that. And there was a lot of people that you would have thought could have been in the documentary that could have spoke on things. Like I said, I remember he had the situation with the Locks, and they were on the radio, and he had called in on the radio, and they were going back and forth. That's a real situation that wasn't dealt with. You know what I mean? What else? Like I said, a few other situations involving various other things. Like I said, the part about Cassie, the court, you know, the accusations. It was basically like, I felt like they were trying to try him again in the public sphere, if you will, you know, with Capricorn Clark, and you know, talking about the Kid Cudi situation, talking about how she was allegedly kidnapped again, and all of those things were testified to in court. And I always said, you know, in my understanding of what it was just like in court when they were saying, hey, you know what, when you do evidence, it's not what you believe, right? It's what you can prove. And so when they were talking about the Kid Cudi thing, I was like, well, hold on, you know, I understand if people you dislike a person or whatever, but you know, they did the fingerprint test and they said they found a female's fingerprint on the Molotov cocktail that was thrown in the in Kid Cudi's Porsche, right? And so, but like I said, in the narrative that was pushed in the documentary, it was as if Diddy had something to do with that based on what Capricorn Clark was saying happened to her. Like I said, and it's her word against his. But when all of those things were brung up in court, they seemed to be discredited during cross-examination, if you will. So like I said, once again, it's about who do you believe? What do you want to believe? You know what I mean? And like I said, when people say, you know, if they don't say I know factually, then there's always some doubt for me, you know? But like I said, Diddy mom's speaking out. She's serious. She's basically saying, hey, you know what? My son didn't ever put his hands on me. You know what I mean? That's a lie. And like I said, I would think she would be directing that more at Kurt Burrows, right? Than anybody else, if you will, from that perspective, right? And, you know, could this, the bottom line, or should I say the underlying thing, could this mean a lawsuit, potential public relations fallout, and a deeper conversation around how we document hip-hop history when trauma is involved? You know what I mean? I don't think that, like I said, once again, if there was no evidence of that, I don't think it should have been spoken of. Like I said, once again, the situation involving, and this is Kurt Burrows making these allegations, right? The situation involving, you know, Biggie being charged for his own funeral. Ladies and gentlemen, we seen no documentation of that, right? So we choose to believe what people telling us because we believe that because they were close to the situation, that everything that they're saying may be related to some kind of truth and fact. We don't know that. Like I said, what we understood, even in Diddy's case, with the video with Cassidy. Oh, that's Cassie, I'm sorry. That's a fact. We seen him beat her, you know what I mean, and do some foul things to her. Like I say, he wronger than two left feet for that. But at the end of the day, you heard the juror in the documentary say he wasn't on trial for domestic violence. So, how they dealt with that and how it was dealt with was accordingly. And so that's the reason why they came to the conclusion that they came to. You see what I'm saying? And felt like that Cassie was a willing participant, believed Jane Doe was a willing participant, and all of the other things that they had testified to about the documentary and the information in court, and why they came to the conclusion that they did. You see what I mean? I like that fight a little bit better than I do just people saying any old thing because that's what they want to believe about somebody because they feel a certain way about it. Like I said, I also think that the part about Keefe D and what he said about the Tupac murder and all of the things that he testified and how they caught him up and why he came to testify and say the things that he did in regards to his involvement in the murder of Tupac Shakur. That right there is somebody saying, hey, you know what? I was involved. This is what happened. This is who I passed the gun to. This is why I was standing on the corner. And when the ambulance rolled by, the girls yelling out the window, if he wasn't hanging out the window, we would have never spotted him. They would have got away. All of the things that was said in that documentary in regards to that, I thought that was very important. But we heard that before. We heard that on Murder Rap. You know what I mean? And basically they, kind of pushed that again for the people who didn't know, the new generation, you know what I mean, and really not up on the game. They heard of Tupac and all of those things. But I think that was important, and part of the documentary that basically speaks for itself. You don't even have to speak for that. You know what I mean? And I think people who watch that, they kind of were glued to that. I thought that's what it mainly focused on. That was the part that was true and factual was that part. Everything else was basically speculative and sensationalized at best because there was no direct documentation or video or evidence or audio in relation to what was being said about certain things. I thought the Little Rod part was powerful too because once again they had audio and Diddy talking about what he was talking about. Like I said, usually, those are the things, that got me, to thinking, oh, okay, cool, nicely produced, but we already knew this. You know what I mean? I think a lot of the things they got from, the Art of Dialogue. Like I said, I interviewed William Lassane on the Art of Dialogue twice, right? The second interview did, the first interview in its entirety did 800,000 views. Mark Curry interviewed on the Art of Dialogue. Nobody was dealing with Mark Curry before he interviewed on the Art of Dialogue. Mark Curry interview did 1 million views on the Art of Dialogue, the entire interview. You see what I'm saying? So I know that they looked at the Art of Dialogue and probably some of the interviews and got, some of those reasons why they did what they did. Also in the connection to Gene Deal, right? And why he wasn't in the documentary, from that perspective. I don't think they wanted to pay a Gene Deal's price that he wanted. He speaks on that over on the Art of Dialogue. You got to check it out. I'm telling you. So, because you'll be able to, like sometimes it's not what people saying, but it's what they not saying that gives you the information that you need to make an informed decision about what it is. Gene Deal also puts the director, young lady, on blast, if you will. You know what I mean? Gene Deal said the director was talking greasy to him. Go check the interview out, man. You got to check it out. And so when we understand the totality of it and why, like I said, when you go to Art of Dialogue, you see Gene Deal's numbers. Gene Deal does great numbers. So they basically took the great numbers interviews. William Lassane, I did him twice. The first interview did almost 1 million views, the entire interview. You go to Gene Deal right now, almost 500,000 in one day. You go Mark Curry, almost, the first interview he did with Art of Dialogue before anybody was dealing with him, did 1 million views. You take that, you put that in the documentary. You understand what I'm saying? And like I said, people are speaking their truth. These are people who, and like I said, when you deal with, also, don't let me leave this out. Also, Kirk Burroughs, his first interview with the Art of Dialogue. So you got Kirk Burroughs, Mark Curry, Gene Deal, William the Same, all on the Art of Dialogue doing interviews and did crazy numbers. And they take it now, flip it, you know what I mean? Rehash it. Also, Greg Kading never appeared on it, but like I said, but when Murder Rap came out, it was crazy hot. Everybody wanted to. So basically, you take all of those elements and you put it into a documentary. You know, they're not selling anything. It sells itself, right? But like I said, once again, what Diddy's mom is saying is that, hey, you know what? This never happened. It never happened. You know, Diddy never put his hands on her. Like I said, we don't know if it's true or not. Like I said, this is Kurt Burrows talking about it as if he knew the truth in regards to that situation. Just like him talking about as if he knew the truth involving Biggie, Diddy actually charging Biggie's funeral to Biggie's estate and taking it out his royalties, right? We never saw any information, like I said, once again. So it can be speculative at best, but like I said, people are stating, you know, Kurt Burrows said he saw it. He saw it. So who do you believe is the question? You know what I mean? Who do you believe in all of that? But like I said, when I give you the summation of the where and where things came from, like I said, once again, they're watching closely to the culture and what we are putting out there, because once again, you know, you can tell so many stories, but like I said, when you go to the source and you doing it, you know, they could have did it, but they never thought about doing it. You know what I mean? And so the question is, you know, well, were people paid? You know what I mean? Paid to talk. And if they were, then the credibility from that perspective on, you know, because Netflix says, well, nobody was paid. I don't think it's bad if nobody, if people got paid, I don't think that's wrong. I think you pay people for their time. You know what I mean? I don't think that's, but when if you say that they didn't get paid and you find out that people did get paid, then that says, well, the credibility, you know what I mean, of what this is. Why would they lie? Why would you have to lie? You paid, yeah, you paid, you know. But like I said, because Diddy's team, basically their argument was these people were paid, and so since they were paid, you know, they'll tell any kind of story because they were paid, right? Some true, may be true, may not be true. That's a question that still hasn't been answered yet factually, you know, from that perspective. But like I said, once again, Sean P. Diddy Combs' moms are speaking out, man, and she basically saying, hey, you know what? It's a bunch of lies. She's basically saying what Kurt Burrows said is a lie. That was Wayne Burrows, you know, the other day came out, and he basically saying also, you know, not outright saying he's a lie, but basically saying that it didn't happen, that Biggie's estate was not billed for Biggie's funeral or anything involving his death, if you will. So like I said, once again, it's who do you believe? What's that? He say Diddy and somebody said Diddy and Kurt Burrows were lovers. I don't know, man. I wasn't there. Like I said, a Gene Deal. No, let's be clear. Kurt Burrows alluded to something in his, like I did a video about that. Kurt Burrows alluded to a lot in his lawsuit. I think once again, the part that was very important to me was the fact that he said that he had rented those cars to go to Las Vegas, from Harlem to Las Vegas, on the in dealing with that weekend that Tupac was shot and ultimately died, right? So that part right there, I don't know how true that is, but that was put in his lawsuit. And so that part right there was interesting, but he made a whole lot of other accusations as to Diddy essaying him and so on and so forth. So I wouldn't outright call that you know, them being in a relationship, you know what I mean? I refer to the lawsuit. And the statement of what is believed to be, or should I say the allegations in the lawsuit. And then you go from there. But like I said, I don't know if they were lovers. You know, that's not something that I can accurately speak on. Oh hell no. Like I said, Diddy's no saint. Diddy's no saint at all. We seen the tape with Cassie. We seen how he beat her. You know what I mean? We seen all of the pictures and all of the other times, that bruises and when her eye was busted open, all of those things. Absolutely. Absolutely. So like I said, but once again, the depiction of somebody being something more than that, like I said, that shit go on every day. People get into fights, domestic violence, all of that happens every day. Like I said, you can choose to let this be something that overpowers your thinking in regards to somebody and keep you from, focusing on your life. I get it. I understand it. I see it. I'm like, okay. Yeah, but look, right now, Diddy doing 50 months. He doing 50 months. You know what I mean? He did what he had to do. He got charged. He went to court. He fought his case. He pleaded his case. And I wouldn't say that he won all the way, but I would, you would probably have to ask him, does he feel satisfactory about the outcome? Only he could answer that question, right? But that's what happened. So, all of the other name calling and monsters, and I don't care. I don't care about calling him no names. That's not going to bring me closer to my goals. That's not going to bring me closer to nothing that I wish to obtain in life. When we talking about straight down the middle, or you just talking straight game. Yeah, he doing 50 months. He's in Fort Dix right now. You know what I mean? And that's that. We seen what it is. And like I said, I think the lesson to be learned here is, just make sure that you don't do nothing like that. Make sure I don't get involved with nothing like that. I think that's the most important part. You know what I'm saying? So like I said, hey, but his mom's right now is coming out basically saying that, hey, man, you know what? She's hurt. It's outrageous, the stuff that they said about her. And once again, think about it. When Janice Combs was young and, they lived in Mount Vernon and they was going to Harlem and all of that, one can try to articulate a story or create a narrative around their life. But, other than what, pictures from childhood and her holding her son and, talk about, yeah, the dude, what he said, I got beatings, but Diddy got his ass whipped but his mom. Okay, cool. Does that mean that Diddy's mother loved him more than your mother loved you because she beat him a little harder? It can be interpreted both ways because she didn't want him to go on the wrong path. But if you're trying to insinuate something that is the reason because he turned out the way he turned out, if you're trying to paint a certain picture or narrative about a person and then you don't tell the whole story, once again, I keep referring you back to the Jay-Z and Diddy thing that they brought up earlier this year while Diddy was in jail, saying Jay-Z and Diddy was responsible for some kind of essay on some young lady at the MTV Video Music Awards in the early 2000s. Ladies and gentlemen, that was an outright lie. It was an outright lie. So much so that they dropped the case. There was no evidence, no proof, no nothing. It did not happen. And so for the people who need to understand how narratives can be created, how people can make accusations about somebody and they totally not be true, right? But we know bullshit make it around the block before the truth even get out of bed, right? We know that to be true. And then once again, like I said, you don't hear people talking about the Jay-Z situation no more, but and the cold part about it, there is a situation pending right now in court where Jay-Z filed a defamation case. Go look that up in relation to those accusations that were made about him, right? So much so that Jay-Z came out and said, during the time that was being talked about, it was in and around the time that I believe his daughter and Beyonce were doing The Lion King. And he was like, the people at Disney were kind of, hinting at, hey man, don't show up, don't walk the red carpet with your wife because of the accusations that are being made. You understand what I'm saying? And there wasn't any truth to it. There wasn't any truth to it. None. Zero. The White House that they said that Jay-Z them allegedly was at, Puffy, the house didn't exist. There's no house like that in the area that the young lady said that was there. It didn't exist. You understand what I'm saying? So when we take information in, you got to be very careful about what you take in because it's bullshit in and it's bullshit out, y'all. It's bullshit in and bullshit out. And so with that being said, like I said, this, like I said, in this situation involving his mom, it could mean lawsuits, defamation, and not necessarily against Netflix, but against Kurt Barrow for, for stating what he said, like I said, without any kind of proof. Like I said, there's two people so far that are close to the situation that came out and said these are simply not true. You got Wayne Burroughs talking about the Biggie situation, which people kind of gravitated towards. Once again, you're dealing with Biggie. Biggie's an icon, a rap icon, right? One of the best to ever do it. And so when you hear that, people, get sentimental about that. They catch feelings like, well, damn, he, Puffy ain't this and he ain't that. Like, but is it true? Like I said, like the accusations that were being made against Jay-Z and Puffy, right? It sounded, salacious and cruel and all of these other things, right? But ladies and gentlemen, I'll say it again, it simply wasn't true. We know what to be true. We know about the freak offs. We know about the hotel beatings. We know about the alleged shooting at the studio and all of those things. We know about all of that, right? So hell no, Puffy ain't no saint. We know about the allegations and what Keefe D said. Hey man, the reason why we did this was because there was money put on Suge head and Tupac head, right? It was $1 million. We know about all of those things. Like I said once again, so much so with that, like I said, that's why I give it a little bit more credibility. Keefe D's in jail based on his own words. You know what I mean? Based on his own words. Like I said, I'm not gonna speak on whether Biggie was a saint. Anthony Robinson, I don't know Biggie to be a saint or a sinner. You know what I mean? May he rest in peace. That's what I'm not gonna do. You know what I mean? But like I said, once again, there was a lot that could have been covered in this documentary to make it a little bit more better, if you will, right? So like I said, the question is what happens next? Will the Netflix filmmakers respond? Will members of the film provide evidence to support their claims? Right now that Ms. Combs has spoken out, now that Wayne Burroughs has spoken out, will Janice or her legal team take legal action? Will this affect public perception of the documentary or Diddy himself? You know what I mean? Those are some of the questions that we need to be asking ourselves, right? The story is far from over, ladies and gentlemen. You can believe that, right? And this might be one of the most personal chapters yet, if you will, in dealing with Sean P. Diddy Combs' mom's coming out and speaking out about it. Like I said, now I want to hear from y'all. Tell me what y'all think down in the comments. Like I said, drop a comment below. And more importantly, like I said, what we talking about in the chat? He said, yeah. I seen that. He said the crazy part. What is that? Phoenix. What he say? The crazy part is he kept books for Bad Boy, and he talked about how he would cook the books in so many words off the overhead, if you will. Right. When he talked about buying the diamond necklace and all of that too. Yeah, that was crazy. What do you say? Like I said, I wouldn't say the industry's dirty. I would say a lot of people get in the industry. What they do is they so happy to be famous, to get a little money, and they just don't think. Simple as that. What the young lady said that on Making the Band, like I said before, she said yeah, when she got chosen, they gave her a contract, a big thick piece of paper contract, and they gave her 24 hours to sign it. And then you heard what she said. She was like, and I signed it. She ain't had no lawyer look at the contract. She don't know what she was signing, right? She could have been signing herself into slavery. You know what I mean? Once again, but when certain people think it's gonna pop, that's what they do. They now come in and they entertain the bullshit, right? Then you hear later on, 2, 4, 5 years later, they be like, yeah, he got over on us, and he did this and they did that, and the people, no, when it was popping and you was making videos and popping bottles and going to the parties and going to the Grammys and going to the American Music Awards and the MTV Video Music Awards, you know what I mean? it was happening. You know, you had people calling your phone. You know, girl, can you get me some tickets? Can you da 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 da? You know what I mean? But that shit is fleeting. It's fleeting. It's fleeting. It's like, yo, that's a moment in time. It's not making the money. It's what you do with it. You know what I mean? And you see some of the people who made some money. They took, studied, invested, you know, went into different ventures and things of that nature. And so therefore they, you know, they remain successful and wealthy, if you will. Yeah, I don't know whose fault it is. When you say whose fault it is, Festo, whose fault is that? Absolutely, Ray Johnson. Being quick makes you slip. A lot of people don't really understand that. Yeah, like I said, I felt like they could have covered a little bit more about the documentary, if you will, involving Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. Like I said, Suge Knight said it, Michael Moore said it, Frank Alexander said it, and all of these other people said, you know, that Reggie was part of the orchestration and assassination of Tupac Shakur. Once again, like I said, but hey, you know, more will be revealed. Like I said, before you know it, we going into what? We into what? We in December now, ladies and gentlemen. You know what I mean? January, August will be here in no time. So, you know, what's going to be revealed is going to be revealed. And so, thank you for the donation. I appreciate that. Thank you for the $5, Playboy. I wouldn't know about anything about Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. and Capricorn Clark. I wouldn't know nothing about that. So I won't speak on that. Yeah, you got to go over to the Art of Dialogue, man. And he said why Gene Deal wasn't involved in the documentary. You got to go over on the Art of Dialogue. I'm telling you right now, Gene Deal is giving it up in just stating what you know, how it happened for him. He was supposed to be involved with it, but why he wasn't. Like I said, he put the director on blast. He said that she was talking greasy to him. But like I said, to hear it in true, real context, you got to go over to the Art of Dialogue and check that out, man. Like I said, the young lady from, I wouldn't say nobody shouldn't have signed the contract. You can do what you want to do, right? You ain't gonna tell you, you know. But at the end of the day, just make sure and know what you signing. It ain't that you shouldn't have signed the contract. Know what you signing. You know what I mean? Don't be like, well, you know, he did this. No, he didn't do anything. You know, if you had time to go and see a lawyer, you know, you go and see a lawyer the next day. Or tell him, hey, you know what, I'm going to need at least 48 hours so I can get my attorney to review this, right? But if they didn't do that, then you can't come back up and say, oh, man, you know, he did me dirty, you know? Or anybody did you dirty for that matter. That's just the way the industry moves. What's that, the All or Nothing gang? Shout out to the All or Nothing gang. Appreciate that. Come on, man. Suge Knight didn't use Tupac as a shield, man. Stop it. Stop it, man. And like I said, when you say, see, this is the problem. That's what I'm saying. Like, we having an intelligent conversation. When somebody alludes to something like that and you weren't there to see it, once again, this is the reason why Janice Combs spoke out about what she spoke out about, right? Suge Knight did not use Tupac as a shield. How can you, somebody shooting bullets at you, how you, so would he know where the bullet's coming from and they shoot? Come on, man. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. As a matter of fact, once again, how you know that's not truthful, if you really truly listening, was the fact that Keefy D was asked the same question. Did Suge Knight use Tupac as a shield? And he said no, Suge Knight was trying to duck and get down too. So once again, when people say those things, it simply has no truth to it. Yeah, absolutely. The brother from LA basically proved that, like I said, and then but the cold part about that was they contrasted it. with his statement and the brother's statement. But like I said, more importantly than that, we didn't need that to be able to contradict what Diddy was saying, because Keefe D had already did it, right? Not only that, but let's go back to the Soul Train Music Award, right? Go back to the Soul Train Music Awards, and C Gutter was on Vlad. Like I said, C Gutter talked about that and what happened involved with that when Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. lied, right? When he lied and said that Keefe D pulled out a gun. Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. lied and said Keefe D pulled out a gun at the Soul Train Music Awards. C Gutter went on Vlad and confirmed that he was the one that pulled out the gun, right? So that was another lie that Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. was telling in reference to a situation, right, that simply wasn't true. It seems like he was trying to implicate Keefe D in a little bit more than what Keefe D had already implicated himself in. I mean, Keefe D didn't need no help. You know what I mean? And and incriminating himself. But Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. was the type of person that wanted to control the narrative around Tupac's life and what was involved. But the most important part that he didn't tell was that he was fired on August 27th, 1996. And 11 days later, Tupac would be shot in Las Vegas when Reggie the Rat Wright Jr., from what Suge Knight said, from what Michael Moore said, Tim Williams basically said, and these guys were security, basically saying what? That Reggie pulled the security off of Tupac. Frank Alexander didn't have no radio or communications apparatus to communicate accurately with Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. It was a dismal failure. And from all intents and purposes, it was deliberate. It was a sabotage of Tupac's security, based on the fact that Tupac had fired Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. not as his security in working for Death Row, right? But as his personal security, because sometimes certain security guards would moonlight with Tupac after hours on Tupac's personal time. You understand what I'm saying? And so when Suge Knight called and told them to send 5 more security guards for Tupac Shakur that night, Suge Knight, you like I said, I did the video. You can hear him saying it, the actual audio, not what I'm telling you right now. Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. did not send nobody. Suge Knight said it didn't have to happen like that, but Reggie pulled them off of him. He pulled the security off of Tupac, right? Then he goes on, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr., he goes on Vlad, and he says that Russell Poole got it right in regards to what happened to Biggie. And the question is, well, how would Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. know? And then I gave you guys the fact that Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. got caught up in a bankruptcy fraud, right? With Suge Knight involving Suge's bankruptcy, where he was trying to put the building that Death Row was in under a LLC, and he got caught by the bankruptcy trustee. The bankruptcy trustee filed charges against Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. This is in April of 2008. April of 2009, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr., along with his lawyer, as I showed you in documentation, now is going in to speak with the prosecutor in order for a proffer agreement. A proffer agreement involving what? The murder of the notorious B.I.G. Why would he want a proffer deal? Right? So when you understand that, you're going to get it. You put the two and two together. So like I said, once again, when he comes out and he says on Vlad that, Russell Poole got it right, I think Russell Poole, how would Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. know that he got it right? If he did not have intimate knowledge or was in fact involved in that situation. Suge Knight also talked about somebody coming into the prison trying to hem him up involving the Biggie situation. And he didn't go for it. Right? So, like I said, once again, when you understand the dynamics of where it could have went, the documentary could have went, these are all facts. Not me telling you this. It's just simple facts. Like I said, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. tried to file a lawsuit against me for calling him Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. when he is in fact a rat. And I'm going to tell you, the number one, listen to me, ladies and gentlemen, And like I said, because a lot of people, you know, it's one thing to be something, and it's another thing to claim to be something. Let me tell you this, and I'm gonna tell you again because I can't help from telling you. 3 days after Tupac Shakur was murdered, he was dead. Tupac dead, right? This is approximately on the 16th of September 1996. Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. After Tupac's dead, he's not in mourning. He's not feeling no kind of way, right? The only thing he's thinking about is going to the police and telling on Suge Knight and saying that Suge Knight has blood gang members on the payroll and they got guns. Because Suge was no longer dealing with Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. after having a meeting at his house in Las Vegas and asking Reggie the Rat Wright Jr., yo, what happened after Tupac was shot? And Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. had no answers. It was a dismal failure, ladies and gentlemen. But after 3 days after Tupac's death, this is a fact. He went to Officer Yamamoto, and I put up the video, ladies and gentlemen. This is what I'm trying to tell you. This is why it could have been so much more better, because now you're dealing with actual facts of situations where there's paperwork, where there's confirmation of information. You know, like with the testimony as far as Keefe D with the Greg Cady thing. See, now we're talking. So why would he do that? Why would Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. go to the Los Angeles PD, the LAPD, and tell them Suge Knight has Compton gang members' bloods on the payroll and they got guns? I guess he felt like, he no longer wanted to work for Death Row and he just wanted to be a good Samaritan at that time. You see what I'm saying? They're playing the both sides of the fence. I don't condone any kind of violence other than the protection of yourself and your family. You understand what I'm saying? From that perspective, like I said. So when he did that, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. just a week, up recently, was talking like, the homies was this and the homies was that, but yet he didn't tell the homies that he went to the LAPD on them. You see how conniving and diabolical that is? The same people he's smiling up in the face talking about, we from this and we do that, He going behind their back saying, hey, you know what? They got guns on them. Yeah, Suge got them on the payroll. They got guns. I think, the homies from Compton, they, blood gang members. This is what the police said in the article that they wrote in regards to what happened. Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. has never addressed that. Never been asked a question about that. Point blank. So like I said, when he called me, when he tried to sue me, and he was calling me all of these names and things like that. I'm like, hold on, man. Like what? I didn't know the guy. Once again, trying to control the narrative around Tupac and the situation. Once again, when it was asked by Gullible John on Bomb First, right? Reggie, when did you find out what happened to Tupac and what was going on and what had happened? Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. told Gullible John over on Bums First about 3 days after it happened. Ladies and gentlemen, we come to find out in 2025 that was a lie. How was it a lie? Because Reggie the Rat Wright Jr.'s father, like I said, don't have nothing against his father, all due respect. Like I said, more importantly, his father goes and is given an award by the Seaside Police Department. And they were asking about the Tupac situation. And Reggie's father said, hey, right after it happened, Reggie called me and told me everything that was going on. Who was involved? Talking about it was Orlando and it was this and it was that and all of these other things. This is soon after it happened. This is what Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. father said. So he lied to Gullible John. He lied about Suge Knight was the one that told him. He lied about all of these things, ladies and gentlemen. These are facts. These are facts. Like I said, so over on here on Straight Game, you ain't gonna get nothing but facts. Like I said, so when, the old saying goes, believe none of what you hear and half of what you see, it still stands true today. Like I said, once again, it's documentation over conversation, man. you know, and I think that it adds to a little bit more of the credibility in the things that were missed and talked about. Like I said, all of these things were talked about over on the Art of Dialogue, as well as me talking about it and some of what Vlad has talked about, you know what I mean, and various other channels, if you will. You know, not this old spook conspiracy theory, Tupac's still alive and all of this old craziness, right? You know, like I said, I interviewed Tupac's father, and he was the one who confirmed before anybody else that Biggie did in fact stop at the hospital after Tupac was shot, but they wouldn't let him in. Also interviewed on the Art of Dialogue was Tretch, who also confirmed to the same thing in regards to that. You see what I'm saying? So all of the stuff that people have been saying, you know, and I believe that Tupac knew that, you know what I mean, at the time when he was alive, you know. So like I said, once again, just trying to get to the bottom of what's true and what's factual, dealing with the people who were involved, you know, who were actually involved and don't need to sensationalize, or because they might have a lawsuit or might be suing somebody, you know, they're going to talk greasy and crazy about it. You know, it's totally unnecessary. What you talking about? Deserving more all over what paperwork? Yeah, like you say, unless they have irrefutable evidence and not speculation. Very, like I said, it's very important. It's very important. But like I said, most people want to have casual conversation and cocktail conversations about, you know, what was alleged, what was said in the documentary. But I found that the trial is actually much more interesting than everything. You know what I mean? And because it was federal court, you know, the feds don't let you, you know, broadcast like the state do as far as over the television airwaves, right? And or allow cameras in the courtroom. But I found that the trial itself, which I covered, like I said, was way more interesting because everything came out. Everything came out. Even, you know, Cassie talking about Suge and the situation with Diddy, you know, wanting to go get at Suge and getting guns and all of that. That came out in the court. Like I said, coming from Cassie, I believe that. Coming from Cassie, I believe that. And then not only that, but the other guy who was one of Diddy's assistants, he basically corroborated that that's what happened because he was in the car too. And he said that Diddy, you know, made him go or whatever, you know, was one of Diddy's assistants at the time. So like I said, you know, when you got 2 or 3 people saying the same thing, it's more believable than you got one person saying something and you can't corroborate that with nothing other than just what they're saying. And not only that, but then they got an axe to grind with an actual lawsuit that they done filed, like Kurt Burrows. He got an axe to grind in which he filed a lawsuit too. You know what I mean? So, you know, you got to check it in. You're like, hold on, man, you know, you got a lawsuit, your credibility a little bit, you know, what's the name? You know what, A Boogie, I can't tell you what Tupac would have been in 2025, right? Had he still lived, you just don't know. You can't really say. You know what I mean? You know, Tupac could have been anything he wanted to be, like he was when he was. But Tupac, I think from all of what he said, and like I said, Jazz McGuy has spoke about this. He didn't anticipate on living long. You know what I mean? From just some of the things that he talked about in his music, and some of the things that people talked about him talking about to them personally. Well, like I said, the ability to make money, a whole nother thing. Like I said, once again, hopefully Diddy doing what he need to do to better himself. You know what I mean? And yeah, that's basically it. But like I said, ladies and gentlemen, now I want to hear from y'all, man, in the comments. Tell me what y'all think about this. More importantly, and like I said, you know, the big picture. We got, you know, what's that? 7 months, 8 months before the beginning of the trial of the Tupac murder, which is going to be must see TV. I think the cameras are going to be in the courtroom, more importantly, and we're going to see what happens. Like I said, but Diddy's mom spoke out, man, and like I said, she seemed like she pretty upset about what was said and the things that were alleged, right? You know, I want to ask y'all a question. Do y'all think the documentary crossed the line, or is it just a media drama, ladies and gentlemen? Do y'all think that the documentary across the line, or is this just media drama, right? Like I said, subscribe and hit the bell, hit the thumbs up button. Stay locked in with Straight Game TV, ladies and gentlemen. Like I said, I appreciate your time, each and every one of y'all. If I didn't shout you out, I blame it on my mind and not my heart. Once again, 6-7 like, who else? Deserving More, A Boogie, what is that? Dion Nelson, what's that? Ari Williams, who else? All of the people in the chat, the people outside of the chat watching, I appreciate each and every one of y'all, ladies and gentlemen. Your boy Delray, Straight Gang.
Life is like some cards. It's not what you dealt, but how you play it. Play each situation correctly. I remember they used to laugh at a brother.
They said Tupac was untouchable, but behind the walls of Rikers Island, he was just a man, wounded, watching his back, and wondering who he could trust.